Hey guys, welcome to part one of Unit 7. Part one covers chapter 18, which is urban location theory and interaction. So the essential question for this chapter is, in what ways do geographers study and understand the growth and importance of cities? So this unit is all about cities, and by the end of it, you will understand that the form, function, and size of urban settlements are constantly changing. Models help to understand the distribution and size of cities. Models of internal city structure and urban development provide a framework for urban analysis. Built landscapes and social space reflect the attitudes and values of a population, and urban areas face economic, social, political, cultural, and environmental challenges. So by the end of this first section, you'll be able to explain the factors that initiate and drive urbanization and suburbanization. Site and situation influence the origin, function, and growth of cities. Transportation and communication have facilitated urbanization and suburbanization. Improvements in agriculture and transportation, population growth, migration, economic development, and government policies influence urbanization. World cities function at the top of the world's urban hierarchy and drive globalization. Megacities are rapidly increasing in countries of the periphery and semi-periphery, and megacities and world cities experience economic, social, political, and environmental challenges. So first up, we're going to talk about urbanization, suburbanization, causes of suburbanization, and shifting trends. The permanently inhabited portion of the Earth's surface, what the classical Greeks called the ecumene, is a bewildering variety of types of communities with a range of population densities. To analyze complex situations, geographers create a model, a set of assumptions that reflect the world but simplify it enough so they can study it. The model for ecumene includes urban areas, which would be cities with high concentrations of people, suburbs that are primarily residential areas near cities, and rural areas, which are farms and villages with low concentrations of people. So factors driving urbanization and suburbanization. A settlement is a place with a permanent human population. The first agricultural settlements appeared 12,000 years ago. Before that, people survived by hunting and gathering, so they lived in temporary or movable shelters. The first permanent settlements were small enough that the inhabitants could all farm and subsist on the surrounding fields. Over time, in several places around the world, small agricultural settlements began to develop characteristics that made them the first true urban settlements or cities. These characteristics included the presence of an agricultural surplus, the rise of social stratification and a leadership class or an urban elite, and the beginning of job specialization. A surplus of food became available as irrigation, farming, and domestication of animals and plants developed. These changes enabled increasing numbers of people to live in the same location. A ruling class emerged to control the products that were accumulating and the people living in the community. Because not everyone was needed to produce food, some people could specialize in making things, such as tools, weapons, and art. Others specialized as accountants or religious leaders, the first members of the service sector. The process of developing towns and cities is known as urbanization, an ongoing process that does not end once a city is formed. Urbanization also involves the causes and effects on existing cities that are growing ever larger. Describing a region as urbanized indicates that cities are present there. A common statistic associated with regions, countries, and even continents is percent urban, an indicator of the proportion of the population that lives in cities and towns compared to those that live in rural areas. Urbanization is one of the most important phenomena of the 19th and 20th centuries, and geographers should continue to study its development through the 21st century. Today, more than 50% of the world's population lives in cities, and demographers estimate that by the year 2030, 60% will live in cities. Most of those people will be in less developed countries of the world's periphery and semi-periphery. While urbanization can be positive for both individuals and societies, the challenges can be overwhelming if cities are not prepared to grow or urbanization occurs too rapidly. A suburb is a large residential area adjacent to an urban area. Suburbanization involves the process of people moving, usually from cities, to residential areas on the outskirts of cities. There they form communities that are connected to the city for jobs and services. However, they are often less densely populated and less ethnically diverse than cities. Several causes contributed to the growing suburbanization in North America after World War II. Among these were economic expansion, greater purchasing power for many families, the growth of a car-centered lifestyle, and the government's construction of a vast system of new highways, which allowed workers to commute from their city jobs to suburban homes. In the United States, the Federal Housing Administration provided mortgage loans for families to move to the suburbs, which were newly zoned for single-family housing. Racial tension provided another impetus towards suburban growth. As African Americans came to the North in search of jobs and better education, which again is the Great Migration, many white Americans moved to the suburbs in what became known as white flight. Government investment in continued suburban growth, along with a lack of investment in inner cities, hastened both urban decline and suburban growth. Industries and jobs left the cities, and residents followed them. In addition, highways were sometimes built in locations that uprooted or divided existing urban communities. The process of suburbanization is one effect of urban growth. In the developed world, especially in North America, it's been the most prominent change in urban areas since the middle of the 20th century. In 1960, the US population was roughly equally divided. About 60 million people lived in each of the three types of areas: urban, suburban, and rural. Since then, the rural population has dipped slightly and the urban population has increased a little. Just over half of Americans now describe where they live as suburban, meaning the majority of the population now lives in the suburbs. Suburbanization has affected rural areas by increasing population density, building homes and businesses on former farmlands, and adding new residents currently changing in North America. As some suburbanites return to live in the city in a process called re-urbanization, while others move further out into rural areas and work remotely in a process known as ex-urbanization. When an established town near a very large city grows into a city independent of the larger one, it is called a satellite city. Like Cumming would be an example of a satellite city. Next up, we're going to talk about early city-states, centers for service, defining cities, metropolitan areas, and population characteristics. The most prosperous of the earliest agricultural settlements grew into urban centers shortly after the Neolithic or First Agricultural Revolution, about 10,000 BCE, as human groups began to grow crops and domesticate animals. The most successful of these settlements became the world's first city-states. City-states consisted of an urban center, the city, and its surrounding territory and agricultural villages. A city-state had its own political system and functioned independently from other city-states. The population in the surrounding villages and territories received services and protection from the urban center. Because of the wealth of these communities, they were often raided by other groups. As a result, defense was a primary consideration, and military leaders evolved into political rulers known as kings. Early city-states emerged in several locations around the globe in urban hearths, areas generally associated with river valleys in which seasonal floods and fertile soil aided the production of an agricultural surplus. These urban hearths are the same as the agricultural hearths, which is the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, Mesopotamia, the Nile River Valley, the Indus River Valley, the Huanghe floodplain. Urban centers also emerged in Mesoamerica and modern Mexico and in the Andean region of South America. City-states eventually coalesced to form early states and empires. The ancient Babylonian Empire grew from the original city-state of Babylon. Examples of city-states through history include those of classical Greece, like Athens and Sparta, those of the Middle Ages in Europe, and Venice and Italian city-states during the Renaissance. Monaco, a current city-state located entirely within the boundaries of Italy, has endured to modern times. Vatican City and Singapore are also modern city-states, though they do not evolve from previous agricultural settlements. As cities grew, more people developed specialized skills other than producing food. This changed the relationship between cities and the areas around them. City residents depended on farmers for food. In return, people in cities focused on supplying services for their inhabitants and the inhabitants of surrounding regions. Early cities often specialized in particular services. Some emerged as administrative centers for which the elite ruled. Others, often associated with important shrines, became religious centers. Defensive strongholds, university towns, and centers of specialized production also emerged. Most definitions of a city describe a place in which there is a relative concentration of people. Cities are places where people come together to build a nucleated or clustered settlement. The easiest way to define a city is legally. A city is a territory inside officially recognized boundaries. This definition is useful for determining the precise population, for taxing residents, and for establishing and enforcing governing rules. Most large cities today, as legally defined, share boundaries with adjacent cities, yet those boundaries are visible only on a map. On the ground, a person leaving one city might have no idea they were entering a new legal city. A collection of adjacent cities across which population density is high and continuous is a metropolitan area, sometimes called a metro area. Most large cities in the world today are really metro areas of a series of legally defined cities, but they are referred to using only the name of the largest city, like Portland or the Atlanta metro area. For example, the metro area of Portland, Oregon consists of the cities of Portland, Tigard, and so forth, just like Metro Atlanta includes places like Stone Mountain and Alpharetta and Roswell and Cumming and Marietta. All of those are part of Metro Atlanta. In the United States, the term metropolitan statistical area is another way to define a city. An MSA consists of a city of at least 50,000 people, the county in which it's located, and the adjacent counties that have a high degree of social and economic interaction or integration or connection with the urban core. Similarly, micropolitan statistical areas are cities of more than 10,000, so much less than 50, the county in which they are located and surrounding counties with a high degree of integration. Note that this designation is really one in which a city is defined as a nodal region or focal point in a matrix of connections. An urban area can be described by its morphology or physical characteristics, such as the buildings, streets, public places, and homes. The built-up area in where the landscape has a high concentration of people and things constructed by people. The places where built-up areas begin to give way to open spaces and underdeveloped areas of the outskirts of the city. And this end of the continuously built up area can be considered an urban border, whether or not it coincides with a legally defined city boundary. A third way to define cities relies on social characteristics to distinguish urban areas. Social heterogeneity is particularly high in cities, meaning that the population of cities, as compared to other areas, contains a great variety of people. Diversity in cultural interests, sexual orientations, languages spoken, professional pursuits, and other characteristics are present in cities to a much larger degree than in small towns or rural areas. One reason cities are diverse is because they are centers of immigration. In addition, because of the higher population density and the relative anonymity of cities, urban residents are generally more accustomed to diversity. The large size of the population of a city means it's easier for individuals with less common cultures, interests, or ways of life to find others who share them. All right, next we're going to talk about time-space compression, Borchart's model, and infrastructure. Cities have grown in number and size at the same time as improvements in transportation have taken place. Trains, buses, and cars have enabled people to move farther from the center of the city, but still visit or work in the city. Hence, the urban area expands. This is known as urban sprawl. That change illustrates how time-space compression, in the form of transportation improvements, has led to urban growth.
The development of the internet to transport ideas rather than people has allowed more and more people to work from home, which has further increased the distance people can live from the center of the city. Geographer John Borchert developed Borchert's model to describe urban growth based on transportation technology. Each new form of technology produced a new system that changed how people moved themselves and goods in and between urban areas. He divided urban history into four periods, which he calls epochs. Each epoch has profound effects on the form, size, density, and spatial arrangement of cities. Changes in infrastructure within cities themselves also had important effects on the urban structure. The earliest urban centers were pedestrian cities, ones shaped by the distances people could walk. A horse and buggy era allowed for city size to increase as people could move further from the city center and its concentration of services and jobs. Streetcar systems encouraged the movement of the population even further from the center of the city, and growth became concentrated along the lines of these small urban rail systems. Streetcar suburbs, communities that grew up along rail lines, emerged, often creating a pinwheel-shaped city. The advent of the automobile had profound effects on the growth of cities. Using cars and the highways built to facilitate their movement, the population of cities was able to spread out over ever-increasing distances from the urban core. The lower density suburbs that emerged around original cities developed as several legal cities but functioned as part of the metropolitan area focused on the central or original city. Transportation methods thus had profound effects on the growth and shape of cities. So make sure you guys are familiar with Borchert's model. You should know the different epochs as well as the time period and the various different conditions and effects that they have on cities. All right, next up we're going to talk about megacities, world cities, and megalopolis. Megacities are the world's largest cities and typically have more than 10 million people. These urban giants often exert an influence that is felt regionally and sometimes worldwide. This influence is due to the size of their populations, but in other cases their influence is derived as much from their political, economic, and cultural power. Megacities were once found only at the centers of large empires or the most powerful countries. However, that pattern has changed. In the past century, a combination of high birth rates and rural to urban migration in less developed countries has made megacities more common in less developed countries than in developed countries. Of the 30 largest metropolitan areas in the world, about half were in semi-periphery or periphery countries. 3 were in Africa, 5 were in South Asia, 5 were in South America. And this is just continuing to grow. The top 10 list, almost all of them are found in less developed countries today. Megacities in relatively poor countries face the same challenges as megacities in wealthy countries, but without as many resources to respond. Social problems between ethnic groups, joblessness, lack of infrastructure, inadequate housing, and environmental problems, such as Mexico City's severe air pollution, are common in these megacities. Cities such as New York, London, Tokyo, and Paris are known as world cities or global cities, ones that exert their influence far beyond their national boundaries. All are currently media hubs and financial centers with influential stock exchanges, banks, and corporate headquarters. Many of the headquarters of international organizations, for example, New York is home to the United Nations. Some geographers also include cities that are powerful in a particular region as world cities. These include Dubai in the Middle East, Singapore in Southeast Asia, Shanghai in East Asia, and Sydney in the South Pacific. The term megalopolis goes back to the early 1900s and describes a chain of connected cities. It became more common after 1961 when French geographer Jean Gottman used it to describe the continuously developed string of cities from Boston through New York and Philadelphia all the way to Baltimore and Washington, D.C. This is known as the Bosnia or Boswash Corridor and now includes nearly 50 million people. These cities had grown until they formed a single conurbation. They had essentially merged into a single uninterrupted urban area. The cities crossed state boundaries and exceeded the definition of a metropolitan area, which is a focus on a single urban center. Gottman noted that although legally the major centers remained separate, they and their suburbs had become a single region that had taken on some characteristics of a single massive city. Since that time, with urban growth occurring across the planet, other cities have combined into megalopolises. The corridor in California from San Diego through Los Angeles to San Francisco is a single growing metropolitan corridor on the west coast of the United States. Tokyo, Yokohama is a megalopolis found in Japan. By the end of this next section, you'll be able to apply models to explain the hierarchy and interaction patterns of urban settlements. Models that are useful for explaining the distribution and size of cities include the rank size rule, the law of the primate city, and Christoller's central place theory. The gravity model is useful in explaining interactions among networks of cities. So first up, we're going to talk about the gravity model, rank size rule, and primate cities. Cities today range in size from just a few thousand people to ones such as Karachi, Pakistan, that are over 20 million people. Often a city exists in an urban system, an interdependent set of cities within a region. Models have emerged to help explain the distribution and interaction of these urban systems. The gravity model states that places that are larger and closer together will have a greater interaction than places that are smaller and further away from each other. This model can be used to predict the flow of workers, shoppers, vacationers, mail, migrants, and nearly any other flow between cities. It holds that there are greater flows to bigger cities and greater flows between nearer cities. Interaction between cities are complicated by factors beyond size and distance, however. Cities such as Orlando, Florida, and Las Vegas, Nevada are tourist destinations that attract far more visitors than their size and their distance from other cities alone could predict. Similarly, religious sites such as Jerusalem and Mecca, government centers such as Washington, D.C., and various cultural destinations distort effects predicted by the gravity model. However, the basic theory applies to most places. The rank size rule describes one way in which the sizes of cities within a region may develop. It states that the nth largest city will be 1/n the size of the largest city. That is, that the rank of the city within the urban system will predict the size of the city. For example, the third largest city in a system that exhibits the rank size distribution would be approximately 1/3 the size of the largest city. The fourth largest would be 1/4 the size, and so on. Geographers consider rank size distribution to be characteristic of well-developed regions or countries. Such distributions are also more common in federal governments that typically share power with other levels of government. A rank size distribution includes cities of all sizes in the system. This implies that there are cities with a wide variety of services available within the system, from very high order services in the largest cities to lower order ones in the smaller cities. As a general rule, geographers consider rank size distribution to be one indicator of an urban system that can effectively provide needed services to its population. Countries that demonstrate the rank size rule include US, Canada, and India. On the flip side of the rank size rule is the primate city rule. So a country will follow basically either one or the other. If the largest city in an urban system is more than twice as large as the next largest city, the largest city is said to have primacy or be a primate city. A primate city is usually a social, political, or economic hub for the system, and it offers wider services than do many smaller cities. Because services are more centralized, it's more typical of less developed countries and regions. In addition, countries that follow a unitary form of government or extremely strong central government often follow a primate city model. The United Kingdom exhibits urban primacy. London is by far the largest city in the country. However, the relatively small size of the country its unitary government, and its well-developed transportation infrastructure all reduce the need for a number of medium-sized and mid-level services. In the UK, people can get to London for services relatively easily. Northern Scotland is less than a 2-hour flight from London. Mexico illustrates a different model for a country with a primate city. Mexico City provides many services that are not easily available to portions of the population. Across large portions of northern Mexico, people would have to travel great distances to receive even mid-level services due to the lack of medium-sized cities. Of course, population density is thin in these regions as well, illustrating that a simple knowledge of rank size distribution or urban primacy is not enough to completely understand an urban system. So here we are comparing the two primate cities of London and Mexico City. You can see they're primate cities because they are significantly larger than the next largest city in their countries. But again, very different when it comes to the actual country situation. Lastly, we're going to cover central place theory, market areas, and threshold and range. Central place theory, which was developed by German geographer Walter Christaller in 1933, was developed to explain the distribution of cities of different sizes across a region. Christaller defined a central place as a location where people go to receive goods and services. It might be a tiny community such as a hamlet with only a convenience store, a post office, and a religious center, or it might be a slightly larger village or town or small city with more stores and services. Or the central place might be a major city where one can get direct air flights to other major cities or obtain a heart transplant. In Christaller's model, each level or size of settlement would be evenly distributed across space. A market area surrounds each central place, for which it provides goods and services and from which it draws population. Christaller chose to depict these market areas as hexagonal hinterlands because this shape was a compromise between a square, in which people living in the corners would be further from the central place, and a circle in which there would be overlapping areas of service. Nesting hexagons allowed for central places of different sizes to distribute themselves in a clean pattern across the region. What determines which service will be available in any central place? How far apart should central areas of the same population size be located? Central place theory uses the concepts of threshold and range to answer these questions. A threshold is the size of the population necessary for any particular service to exist and remain profitable. Services with very low thresholds, such as a convenience store or a gas station, are present even in very small central places. Restaurants, hospitals, high schools, and department stores have higher thresholds, so they require a larger population within the market area to survive economically. Only in the largest market areas can services appear that depend on the support of huge populations. Stock market exchanges, major sports teams, symphony orchestras, and elite research centers. As cities grow in size, the number and variety of their services increase with the population. Range is the distance people will travel to obtain specific goods and services. People will travel very far for high order services such as wedding rings and heart transplants, but they are less likely to be willing to travel very far for basic services, low order, such as fast food or toothpaste. This helps explain why fast food restaurants can be found in nearly every town, but a shop detailing in diamond jewelry would only be found in larger cities. So that ends it for part 1 of our last unit. So again, we just covered chapter 18.